Planning Committee. The Strategic Planning Committee meeting on here May 12th at 1 p.m. I do want to note for the purposes of the record that we do have one individual participating remotely, our chair, Aloha. I believe it's just one, correct, Madam Clerk?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Moving on, we'll now do the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and join me in the pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, will you please call roll?
Thank you. Good morning. Excuse me, good afternoon. It'll just be one quick second. Sorry for the technical issue. All right. Director Baines,
Present.
Bradford, absent. Dowden Calvillo,
Present.
Jennings, absent. Kennedy, Lauren,
Here.
Sander,
Here.
Veerkamp, absent. Villegas,
Here.
Vice Chair Gallardo, absent, and Chair Soon.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, let the record show that we do have a quorum for the purposes of today's meeting. Although we are not taking any action, we just have informal, or actually information items. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Is there any public comment, Madam Clerk?
There's no public comment.
Okay, that makes it easy to move on to disclosures. Are there any disclosures for conflict of interest that our committee members may have? Hearing none, we'll move on to the one item, which is information, SACOG's 2025 work plan priorities. James.
Great. Chair Don Gavillo, members of the Strategic Planning Committee, it's good to see you on your first Strategic Planning Committee meeting of 2025. So really, this is one item, but three parts today. And I know the memo and the attachments we gave you were fairly comprehensive, let's say. There's a lot of information, but we wanted to break it down into basically three topic areas today, and would love to get your thoughts, your feedback, your engagement. So first topic is calendar year work plan. So the 2025 year work plan, Casey Lazan actually gave you all, as she does often every January, the full board, a preview of the work plan back in January. So checking in on the 2025 calendar year work plan, progress to date, some lessons learned, and again, a theme that I want to highlight early on, which is we are really trying to make an effort to have a lot of public and community and partner agency engagement in our work and have all of that shape our work more than ever before. So that's the first topic. Second is you are on track to adopt the 25-year long-range plan we're calling the Blueprint Plan this fall. And so the question there being, how do we actually, as a region, collectively implement the Blueprint Plan? And then finally, just to touch on my own leadership goals that have been in place now for a number of years, really, which is just a reminder for you all and a preview of kicking off my performance evaluation next month. So those are the three parts in one item. So without further ado, so this year's work plan for 2025, while there is more that this agency does, obviously we really wanted to focus in this calendar year on some priority programs that really were pretty comprehensive, included a lot of staff effort across a lot of our departments and teams here at SACOG internally, and really were pretty high visibility. So, and as I say, so the 6 programs there, and you had this in your first attachment on the sort of the priority programs, obviously the long range plan, the Blueprint. Second is our transportation funding program, which this year and right now we're in the middle of going out on what we call our STIP funding, our state funding program. We have our EEI, or Engage, Empower, Implement program, which you all have awarded grants on last year, and we're in the middle of implementing that. Mobility zones, you've heard from Kathleen Henley a number of times, and actually the board is teed up to adopt those mobility zones as another milestone this month. And to continue, Green Means Go, of course, is the program that helps implement our blueprint from last plan cycle around infrastructure to get more economic development and housing, commercial and jobs in infill areas that have lower VMT. And then finally, our regional monitoring program, which is our data dashboard, which is actually fairly newly upgraded. We gave you a little bit of a preview last November, I believe. And it really is the way in which we are able to answer, how are we doing implementing our long-range plan? And has a lot of different metrics. The thing that I would tell you, which is in the italics, the bottom here, is that really all of these programs, we are really trying to shape with a lot of intensive engagement. So the blueprint plan, for example, we have never done more outreach, community engagement, public events, surveys, focus groups. And now we're doing our second round, as many of you know, of presentations to each of the city councils and board of supervisors across all 6 counties. Our transportation funding program was shaped over 2 years with the board working group, the 6 board members, and then the staff working group, which comprised public works directors, planning directors from every jurisdiction and the transit agencies. EEI was shaped over 2-3 years by community-based organizations, and I think has a lot of support on the board in terms of those grants. Mobility zones is also a very different kind of bottom-up way of actually determining where we have real disadvantaged areas and transportation challenges across all 6 counties. We required that at least one of those zones be in every county. And so again, that's another place where we're just trying to make sure that our work is not a sort of a one-size-fits-all across the region, right? A sort of a theme there. Green Means Go, as you know, is also all 28 jurisdictions support it, and 26 of 28 have identified infill areas or green zones. And finally, the regional monitoring program is really the way in which you can get the data at your fingertips to sort of assess the success or the challenges in implementation. So those are the main priority programs, but the reason that we have 6, and it's a relatively for our agency short list, is because we put so much into an effort as our partners and many of your staff and a lot of the community-based organizations into really trying to shape these things and shape those programs. So, and I can take questions at any time here. Please think of this as pretty informal.
I was just going to say that you might think it's just a short list, but it's not, because those items are so significant and comprehensive, especially the blueprint. So I think that it's a very robust list for sure. And so.
And the old adage goes, you know, if you've heard something, I don't know, or you said something 4 times, like somebody's finally. So we're maybe a bit of a broken record on these programs, but as a staff, right, to all of you as board. But I'm hoping that these are all very familiar to you by now, right? So one of the things, and we were saying this earlier in the Policy Innovation Committee, small sign here of success, but when we were in with the USDOT back in Washington, D.C., it was fantastic how many local elected officials from our region were just going down the row and talking about these programs and the projects, but also speaking to each other's projects. So.
Madam Chair, if I could.
Yes.
And on the last, if you go back to the regional monitoring, I know it's relatively new and it sort of measures the success to which we're accomplishing some of the projects. I wonder if, and maybe you don't have an answer, but whether or not local municipalities ought to have a link to this as well. I mean, I know websites oftentimes get just too much, there's just too much there, but this would be one more opportunity with which local municipalities can continue to, or begin to embrace the broader SACOG region, to your point that you just made about being able to talk to each other's or speak to each other's projects. May or may not fit, but it's just one more way that it's not just SACOG, it's SACOG in partnership with all of our member jurisdictions. So.
Do you want to?
I would say that this, we have a communications plan for rolling this out, because our first annual report came out in November. We're going to be doing annual reports again, so you'll see it again in November, but there will be more frequent updates of that as well. And so to the extent that, you know, you have ideas of like how we can further help our member staff to get their hands on it and use it, we want to do that. Because the idea is for us, for the whole region, right, including local governments, to be able to monitor how is the region doing with Blueprint, but it's also then to be able to use that information in competitive grant applications, in advocacy for projects, right? To celebrate and spotlight the successes that are happening in our region as well. So it is intended to be that comprehensive tool.
And again, the risk of repeating things, you know, I think before the regional monitoring program, at least the latest incarnation, which by the way, too, we've hired some fantastic staff who have actually coded to data sets so that when the data set updates our website updates. And I don't know that I would have known off the top of my fingertips that our traffic fatalities are rising and injuries are rising. Our pavement condition is getting worse, but housing permits are going up all across the region. Housing permits in infill areas are actually in green zones are going up. I don't know that we would know that so readily, right? The feedback loop needs to be more than every 5 years that we do a plan. Okay. Get green. You got it.
It's a topic we talked about before.
Or do it again. Sorry, David. Dr. Sander. There you go. Leave it. There you go.
There we
You're
go.
good.
Green light. It's a topic we've talked about before, and some of us in the room have engaged on a little bit. Supervisor Kennedy and I worked on it at Regional SAN, trying to find ways to implement the next step in Green Means Go or infill development along commercial corridors. Somebody has to, in the region, has to step up and say, we're gonna coordinate with all the public agencies to charge fees and find a way to jointly drive those down. Because one agency at a time, I don't know, took 3 or 4 years for our one agency. We still didn't completely get there. We made progress. I figure probably about 2080, we might have it together at the current rate. But Green Means Go kind of requires something faster than that. I'm talking about sewer fees, drainage fees, water fees, electrical access fees, ADA issues, road fees, park fees, school fees, all the sorts of things that we pile on to infill that make infill impossible in all of our jurisdictions. Infill is just incredibly difficult to make work. And until somebody stands up, and I think it's us, because we kind of invented Green Means Go, until somebody stands up and tries to coordinate those agencies towards a regional goal of getting those fees down, I think the audacious goal ought to be to 0. So there is no infill fee if you want to do an infill project. We're gonna be stuck. We'll get some money for Green Means Go, but the implementation will be limited and the greenhouse gas impact will be big. Because this just encourages greenfield development instead of infield.
Thank you very much, Director Sander, for raising that. It is affirming for our staff. We hear you and we are moving on that. Within Green Means Go, one of the projects this year is we have a collaboration with the California Special Districts Association to hold a convening with the special districts in our region. And it's, so maybe it won't be as fast as tomorrow that we can start in on that. But we, in taking your request last year, we realized we needed to be able to bring those special districts together so that we could have just some initial relationship building. I think you'll actually be getting invitation to one of the sessions that we're putting on this summer and fall with the Special Districts Association. But the goal is so that we can share information about Green Means Go and infill generally, like get some shared, understanding of all of that and just start to build some relationships so that we can kind of start doing that work together. So not as fast as, turning something around next year, but certainly faster, I think, than 2080 as an endpoint.
2060. Yes.
Yeah, and to that point, we've had really good conversations, I think. But to your point around the the broader, sort of thoughtful reduction in fees, in my experience, that that's only one part of the weighted equation, right? The reality is unless you've got metrics built in to say, if we do the following, there needs to be some metrics built in to say, then you need to develop or produce a product. Otherwise, the green means go becomes, green on your mark, right? And rather than go. And so if we're talking about actually doing stuff, it has to have sort of the yin and yang components built into it. Because in my experience, just simply reducing the fees, simply reduced the fees. It didn't produce the folks just sat on the property. They sat on their projects. There were other factors that were weighted. And so I use that as a cautionary tale. If we go down this road and we had a good conversation most recently at SAC Sewer around that issue. And so it's a broader, but to your point, that's the key driver. The fees are incredibly expensive. So
Usually higher than Greenfield.
understood. Yep.
How ironic is that, right? So we really want development to happen.
Right. Yeah.
Digging up streets and
Exactly.
things
Yep.
of that nature cost
Thank
more
you,
than
Madam Chair.
virgin land. Thank you. Any other comments before we proceed?
Okay. Again, just rounding out the calendar year work plan update, and I won't go through all of these one by one, but just wanted to give you a sense of, where do things stand in each of our priority programs. I mentioned a number of these. There's Green Means Go and the CSDA partnership that we just mentioned. We did secure the $22.5 million USDOT grant. We got that signed. We have an E76 that's obligated. So that's actually 9 jurisdictions that we got together and won that for green zones. I think I've mentioned most of these already. You're going to get an update on the transportation funding program with the STIP awards and sort of lessons learned in an interim way, because it's a very different way of doing this, as I think we are all finding out. But it is, we've made this commitment now as a region to rethink how we do our STIP. And I think we've given you a pretty good sense of where things stand on the blueprint plan. But just a reminder, you'll be asked to release the draft blueprint, and we actually have that now. The huge milestone that staff has just reached in the Land Use and Natural Resources Committee. They'll be asked to approve releasing the draft plan up to the board. The board, May 29th, will be asked to approve releasing the draft plan for public comment in June and July. So a lot of work, but I do think that this kind of focus in these priority programs has helped, but that is not all we do, as you know. So just a few other things, again, that should be very familiar to all of you as board leadership. State advocacy, right? If you remember, the direction very clearly and unanimously last year was we need to take a run at updating SB 375, the greenhouse gas targets. It's getting harder and harder, if not impossible, to meet those. So we are doing just that. We have a set of principles that we've adopted with our larger MPO allies across the state, and we are engaging. It won't be easy, but it's an all hands on deck. Obviously, federal advocacy, we just got back from CAP to CAP, and this morning at the policy committee talked about the transportation reauthorization bill, which is due to get renewed next year. They're never usually on time, but they do start writing the bill right about now, and so important that we try to influence that. We've had a lot of conversation on transit funding with the Transportation Committee and the full board. SB 125, the state allocation of funding to basically make sure that we don't have to have operating deficits or service cuts, has been allocated. And a reminder that SACOG is in a role now to do a financial analysis of the operators, financial sustainability. That's coming. CARTA and the Toll Authority, thank you for those of you that sit on that. That is not SACOG. That is in some ways a startup effort, and to try to get that to be independent and stand up on its own. But we have YOLO 80 as the project moving forward there, and we hope other things like I-5 to the airport and the county line and other projects coming soon. And then finally, which is a big topic that you all have talked about quite a bit, but back to that idea of the engagement, right? For the board, it is rotating the board meetings, doing these offsites, doing the tours before and after. The Northern Virginia tour that we did before Cap to Cap, the Peer Region tour last summer to Denver. Again, that's really more how we try to do our work. We're trying to do our work and really be intentional to engage all parts of the region and lots of different types of stakeholders than we've done it before. So that's a roundup of the work plan so far to date. Before I get into the next topic of blueprint implementation, any questions on these?
Any questions?
All right, good to go. Okay, so as I mentioned, and I think you all are very well aware of at this point, we have a blueprint plan, our so-called before we used to call MTP SES. It was a big mouthful. We rebranded it into the blueprint plan. We have somewhat unusually roughly a 5-year window to implement this plan this time around. And that is because you all as a board made a decision that we should focus our efforts on SB 375. We took a sunset on the last bill, AB 350, to give us 2 extra years. And so we were going to get 2 more years or put us on that permanent schedule, but we suggested to you last year that you couldn't do both. And you made, I think, a very strategic decision to put your eggs in the reform SB 375 basket. That means that you only have a minor update. It's not nothing. I want to say it is quite a bit of work, but it's technical work. It's not we're reopening the plan, due actually in 2 years. But it's a minor update. So the large plan, the significant substantive plan, will be in effect until now the next major update, which will be 2031. And what that means is you have a runway, right? You're about to adopt a pretty significant plan. It suggests a lot of things. It suggests what the region needs to focus on. And so it is an opportunity for us to think about articulating what an implementation plan for, I mean, always we want to be doing plans and implementing them, right? We don't want to just do plans for the sake of planning. A good example for the last plan is Green Means Go. So as Director Sander knows, because he was chair at the time, we were asking, and you all were asking, the board was asking in 2019, we have a lot of assumptions here about infill development, and it's great. We're actually all kind of on board, but we need to make that real. That is not just going to happen because it sits in the plan, right? So that is where, then we went out, we engaged, we talked to developers and your staff and many others, and that's where Green Means Go came from, which was we want to actually make this plan real, not just have it be wishful thinking. So that's the one example of implementation. So here's the piece in which, and you all have done a great job asking questions so far, but I want to try to figure out how do we deliver this, because we're about to go out this summer and talk to a lot of your staff and stakeholders on the plan. So how do we deliver sort of what we've learned so far in the blueprint, the direction, sort of where the arrow is pointing, if you will, and how do we really try to focus in on what it means to implement a plan once we've adopted it. So I know there's a lot in this list, and believe it or not, this is also a condensed list, but I just want to give you some samples. If you think of this blueprint plan as both a kind of an engagement process, an outreach process, what have we heard, right? We're required to do that by law, but I will tell you, as I've said earlier, we've done more outreach and engagement than ever before. So what did we hear? And then when you do the technical analysis, you do the data and the modeling and the demographics and the fiscal analysis, right? It's the what did we learn? And so if you can, and this is very, very rough, right? But I just wanted to give you a sense. We've heard a lot of themes, and if you've heard us come to your city council or board of supervisors now, you've seen the themes and you've heard this piece. Housing affordability, lack of housing, attainable housing, affordable, but also attainable, missing middle, options for all stages of life, safety, having more transportation choices and options, because people would actually love to have an option or a choice to not sit in traffic and get out of their car, but feel like they don't have them. Complete and walkable communities. And that is both walkable, but it is also, because we're a very suburban region, right, an easy 5-minute drive. So that's the land use piece and the mixed use, natural disasters, evacuation, ag, open space. And then finally, the TA for local jurisdictions, when we've gone out and talked to all of you and your boards and councils and your staff, obviously, a lot of interest in, okay, where there's overlap here between our local priorities and what's in the plan, can you, SACOG, can we as a region get behind grants? And we're doing this. You saw cap to cap, if you were back there, you saw the priority list for the transportation prod. We're now whittling it down to a relatively shorter list, which is a good thing. Then we move over to what did we learn? And on what we learned, again, this is not inclusive of everything, but I mentioned earlier, a little bit, this comes back to your regional monitoring report that we've mentioned. So we have a safety issue, our fatalities and injuries are rising, our transportation system condition is getting somewhat worse. It sort of varies by place, by jurisdiction, but road conditions are getting worse. And that is a big reason that the board decided to weigh in on the first funding program with a fix it first maintenance and safety emphasis. We know that transportation revenue is declining and going to continue that decline. And the longer we wait to do something with the gas tax, the more we'll paint ourselves in a corner. This could be somewhat a depressing list on the right-hand side here. So just make sure we'll pass the cookies around and get you some sugar. Transit agencies having fiscal challenges and fiscal cliffs. We are not alone in this region for that. And anyway, so I will, infill development is key, and lack of housing product and attached missing middle attainable housing.
Because I love this list so much, I just would like to add that our greenhouse gas goals for agencies like Yellow Transportation District are being undermined by the limited technology that's available, or technology that doesn't offer us long-term solutions. Like, for example, our Proterra buses that have the technology challenges.
That is a great topic, Director Lauren, and we would love to actually come back to you all with that, because I think as we remember how I mentioned under SB 125, we have to do a financial sustainability analysis of all the operators. We really do want to be mindful of things like the state requirements to switch to zero emission. While it is great, and we don't want bus facilities in low-income neighborhoods because that's an environmental justice issue, we also want to make sure that we understand the expense that is the transition to zero emission and how we get that funded. Because if we're transitioning our fleets at the expense of providing service, that is something that we should be really concerned about.
We have to be mindful of that, of course, absolutely.
Yeah. So again, just trying this out with you on the, what did we hear on the plan? What did we learn on the plan? It can be a dense list, could be a depressing list. Hopefully not though, right? Because we're shown that we're a region that's ready for investment. We have, we think, great programs and plans to be responsive to this. Now, in your attachment B, you had another very lengthy attachment with all the policies and actions. It's actually a requirement of every long-range plan. You have to have a section of your plan to be policies and actions, right? So again, you have a plan, but actually how do you implement it? So we just tried to boil down here what's in that long attachment for attachment B by, as it is in attachment B, are 4 strategic priorities: vibrant and inclusive places, next generation and mobility, enhancing, modernizing our transportation funding and revenue, and finally, basically like fixing it, safe, equitable, resilient infrastructure. And then these are just some of the policies and actions. Again, we couldn't do all of those that are listed there, but it gives you a sense, right, of like, well, if under each of these priorities, how might we go about implementation of the plan? I think you have your chair with a hand up.
Sorry, I see, Darren, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to chime in on the next gen mobility segment and just bring up for this group for conversation and hopefully maybe action. The next gen mobility, a lot of you remember we passed the next gen transit strategic document. We had 4 strategies in there that talked about seamless user experience, planning and funding, transit design and delivery, and reducing mobility disparities, which we would put a different twist to it today, given the current environment back in DC. But essentially, connecting people to jobs. I wanted to tease out something that I brought up in a couple meetings ago, and that is, I feel like if we keep talking about this, there'll be a next crop of electeds that come in and be talking about the same thing. And I want to plant a flag for us to really connect our region. And if you look at the document, the Next Gen Transit document, which we passed in 2021, we really had a really intentional approach to make sure we were connected out to Davis, up to Placerville, out to El Dorado, and we were always looking Auburn, excuse me, and we were always trying to make that happen. So, but I feel like if we start to develop almost a CIP of sorts to really give something tangible for future boards to work towards, that we can really, get at this. And if you think about our residential specific plans, some of them take 2 or 3 decades to finish. So it shouldn't surprise us that trying to build out a transit, infrastructure for the region shouldn't take anything less, but it will take political will and continuous focus for future boards. So it's a big audacious goal type of thing, but I wanted to ask my colleagues here from the strategic planning committee if that's something you think is worthy, and if so, would love to maybe add this to already robust work plan. Over.
Thank you. I think there's merit.
Thank you.
Anybody else wanna weigh in on that?
Maybe I'll just jump in. Chair Soon, as you and I have discussed, and again, a reminder for the board and for this committee, there's a big theme on transit that you've already heard this year, right? We have to update and negotiate a regional MOU that basically allocates federal transit funding. We have SB 125, as we've mentioned here already. We have to look at sort of financial sustainability strategies. We're required to do that. And then as Chair Soon mentioned, you all have adopted a next generation transit strategy, right? Last board meeting in April, we had Christoph Spieler come talk a little bit about the key elements of successful transit. It seemed he resonated with many of you. And next month, or this month, sorry, in May, we're actually going to focus on microtransit at the board. We have another speaker coming in. And then right after the board meeting on May 29th, all of you that sit on transit agency boards, we've invited you to stay around and sit with us, have lunch. We've invited all the transit agencies here. And we're actually going to get an update from the California Transit Association about sort of the state of transit. All by way of saying, this is a very ripe issue. The issue, I would just say this to all of you as leaders in your community and leaders on the board. This, in my mind, is so very much guided by both having an audacious vision for transit and right-sizing that vision to the available resources. Because we are not going to be able, and our plan suggests that we have to significantly increase transit ridership to meet not just our greenhouse gas goals, but all kinds of goals. But the funding for that, right, is shaky at best, right? So in terms of how much do we expand service? Do we expand in the urban core light rail? Do we invest in BRT? How much do we do microtransit, which is a great service, but is costly, right? How are we going to pay for all that? So we don't have the answers, but I'm just saying, I think, so there's and actually, if you go back to January, we gave you all a sort of a Transit 101. It was actually interesting. We actually asked all the operators, what are your big capital projects that you need to do? And some of those weren't necessarily expansion. Some of them were a new transit facility, right? A new bus yard, a new next-gen transit facility in Yuba Sutter. Dedicated, we've got Stockton Boulevard Bus Rapid Transit. Could be the first BRT in our region. What does it look like to get behind that? And I think this is the classic challenge for all of us and all of you, which is those trade-offs, right? And establishing some priorities and making sure you understand the constraints of your available funding. So we don't try to promise everything for everybody, but we can actually deliver something for some people it'll actually make a difference. Anyway, it's a very ripe topic. That's what I'm saying. Not one without challenges.
Yeah, if I could just add, so James and I thought maybe the committee whereby a lot of us who serve on transit boards, when that committee is developed, that would be the appropriate committee to take this on and further develop the next gen transit vision and into something again more tangible and something people can work towards, taking into consideration all the challenges and limitations that James just articulated.
Okay.
It's definitely a challenging topic. Having chaired regional transit, I thought the speaker in April was interesting. I specifically asked him, about our challenges, which is we often have transit like fixed rail coming through neighborhoods that don't have much density because that was industrial land that was cheap and where the railroad tracks were. So that's what we did in Sacramento. And elsewhere, our population density is so low that in order to get, adequate ridership, I don't know, there's no way to run enough buses to enough places to gather all the people who are living out there at RD 5 and 4 and 3 and 6. And his answer basically was, well, people are just going to have to get used to spending a lot more time getting places. And you need to build things a lot more dense. That was sort of the two alternatives, neither of which we can accomplish with that line item. And the one thing he did not like, I like the idea of zero emission vehicles that operate like Uber or Lyft or something to get people around. It seems like that might be the most efficient means of moving people in suburban areas, which predominantly what we are is one giant suburb in Sacramento by development type. So I don't know. I think this requires a lot of thought. And unfortunately, the transit industry has sort of a one view, one track, route we want to go on. Big buses, although it's changing a little, fixed light rail, and a very expensive labor force to accomplish all that with not much productivity. So I don't know, our transit, people who are taking transit to work now, we're still single digits. Are we 2%, 3% of our region? Some number like that? Just playing at the tiny, tiny little edge. I wish I had a great answer or solution here. I just see really big challenges.
And again, I would love just hold on this slide. So hear you loud and clear on transit is a major theme. The region is going to have to work on the next 5 years. That is pretty loud and clear, right? Solving tackling our transit challenge. I'd love to hear what else in this list. Again, this is trying to distill that attachment B that you had with all those policies and actions. We're going to get a lot of public comment on that. We're going to be talking to staff and lots of folks. If you look at this, sort of, you think about the next kind of 5 years, and you could also tell us, this is a little esoteric, or this is not the right level, or you need to boil this down further. Love to get any other thoughts on this. And you can just mull and it's okay.
Mulling is a good thing.
Yeah, mulling is okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Madam
All right.
Chair. Okay.
Yes.
So just real quick, I mean, one to address Director Sanders' point. I mean, yes, it's definitely a very complex issue, and it won't be solved overnight. That's why I think we need to just reset the expectation, right? This is something that's ongoing and likely to last longer than most of us, right? Being in these positions. So I think let's just accept that. But you know that old saying about journey of 1,000 miles starts with that first step. So let's start taking that first step, acknowledge the complexity, and let's get the brain trust working. I think we're on a good path with having our colleagues who are on transit boards, like yourself, on a committee to talk about it, and who understands the other challenges that go into influencing any decision to transit, and won't be myopically focused on just transit, but recognizing the changing landscape that we have going around us, from suburban communities, some of them urban. The landscape will look different in the future. So we are cognizant of that as well. And then even on the Green Means Go, just to, tack on this, I don't want to keep transit to death, but the Green Means Go funding we talked about earlier, I mean, I think they, absolutely, I agree with Director Villegas. It's not just fee reductions, right? It's the financing. And I think there should be a timing component that you're not just gonna, if you want fee reductions or better financing or things to make these projects pencil, there needs to be a timing component of when you implement. And so those kinds of requirements need to be put in place. If people, it's the incentive. It's the incentive to get going and actually turn these projects into reality. And so they cannot be allowed to just, have the entitlements, have the reduced fees, and just sit and wait for a market to have, higher price points. Those are the kinds of things I think we can talk about putting in place to incentivize folks to get going now. Over.
Thank you. I also wanted just to mention that under Next Gen Mobility, that it's important to note that, our transit needs are different throughout the region. And, definitely different from the urban core than Auburn, for example. Microtransit works incredibly well. On demand service works incredibly well for us. It's actually increased our transit participation, and we've been able to utilize zero emission vehicles for that purpose. So I think, just recognizing that transit is very different, it doesn't always need to be the light rail and the large buses and things of that nature. We only have one small bus now. Everything else is smaller now.
I'll give you one more.
When we have transit districts come in and speak, it would be, I think, helpful to have Autumn Bernstein present one of the things that we're trying with microtransit in Winters, and the Yellow County is having the microtransit, but also having some like fixed route mixed in, because they're, according to the heat maps, they're just like UC Davis to Winters, UC Davis to Winters. That is not just one person going, but maybe 6 people. So maybe she could report on what the facts are that they're being able to document with that crossover.
Yeah, okay. Generally speaking, this is not a surprise. It makes sense. The 4 priorities. Okay, all right, we're in the ballpark.
I'll just be reading, you
Yeah,
have to respond to it.
please.
So one of the things that I think about, and I thought about a lot this weekend, given all the construction that's happening on 80, the closures, the lane conversion, the ball games, concerts, there's a lot going on. And so I ended up using a lot of the surface roads all over the region, just because that's what you had to do. And the road conditions are deteriorating, and we all know this, by the minute. They're getting worse and worse and worse. And I actually think, and while I recognize we have to compartmentalize our priorities, and a lot of this is driven by state and federal requirements, if we don't thoughtfully think about the safe infrastructure, the bottom bullet there, and on the repair and safety of our roads, which is what our residents see, use, and feel every single day, I think it's going to limit our capacity to be creative in the other areas. As much as we have to being able to walk and chew gum at the same time, we're going to have to be thoughtful around how we spend our limited resources on road repairs and how we partner with our partner agencies, because the roads are falling apart. And that is, I mean, it has risen to the top in terms of the complaints that I get.
Yeah.
Number one, like everything else is seemingly falling off, and roads are number 1, number 2, and number 3 these days. And to the extent that we continue to push on these bigger, more audacious goals, we cannot lose sight of kind of the bread and butter moments of what we have to do. And I'm not saying I'll pivot everything. I'm just simply saying we we really do need to spend some focused energy on how do we support our local jurisdictions to be thoughtful around that space. So anyhow.
I think that's a good point. And then also being aware of the fact that those, no emission vehicles are a lot heavier and have a greater impact to our roadways. And so, with gas tax being more limited, that impact is going to be realized even more so as we continue to move forward.
I think a lot of the elected officials in the region don't even realize how big this problem is. In Rancho Cordova, we're on top of it. I think we probably have the second highest PCI or something like that in the region because we've been able to devote a lot of resource to it. But there are other agencies, I mean, Patrick, you might be on the opposite end of the list at the county where I don't know if there is enough money to deal with the backlog. Like, I don't. It's tens of billions, right?
Yeah.
Just a billion?
Just $1 billion.
I thought it'd be more than that. I guess it depends how you measure it, but I don't know, actually, if there's much sort of elected official knowledge or even agency accountability about this. Because our transportation guys came in and we kind of repave every neighborhood every 7 years is the schedule we're on.
Yeah.
And yeah,
We have a schedule. We have a schedule as well. Well,
Yeah.
we're smaller. We are smaller. That's the problem.
that's, and our transportation people are saying that's close to what we need. We're sort of maintaining, but we'd be more efficient if our PCI was closer to 80.
Yeah.
So what is it gonna take to get us to 80? And it's like another third more than we're spending now on roads. I mean, these are massive numbers, right? And in all of our elective cycles, you can just sort of ignore that, I guess, but eventually you get to Oscar's position where, why are all my issues roads?
No, it's definitely something that we hear
So,
about.
so 2 things to wrap up on that. There's got a couple more slides. One is, remember in the STIP state funding round, I've mentioned this already, all of the work that you as a board put in and actually all of the direction from the staff working group as well was fix it first, maintenance, preservation, safety, right? And so that we pulled that through to the STIP cycle. We've had a couple of jurisdictions say, wait, I've got a brand new project I want to invest. Like, actually, this is for fix it first. But you'll get an update, the Transportation Committee and the Land Use Committee later this week. And then secondly, I just bring it back to the regional monitoring report, right? So I think that's why that data, right? Our staff has spent so much time on that data so that we can be, and I know your individual jurisdiction staff tell you all the time, how bad things are, but it would be, I think, incredibly helpful to know how much worse is it getting? Where is it getting better? Is it getting better because we've been able to devote some resources, right? So closing that feedback loop is really important. And that's really in this work plan is really more in the how, right? And the accountability and the monitoring.
James.
Yeah.
Just one quick update. So thinking about what's coming up on your agenda this fall, right? So the federal funding rounds, one of the priority programs that we've identified is pavement management. So we do want to take a small amount of those federal dollars to see like what efficiencies can be gained both from the funding we have available as well as kind of the best lessons learned from around the region, because we've invested in the software to at least get the information into the pavement management software, but a lot of jurisdictions can't even afford to pay for the inspections to see how bad the problem really is.
Oh,
So we're trying to,
That's remarkable.
yeah, so trying to get at least people on a common playing ground to know how bad the problem is before you make a plan for what.
Which
to do
just
about
goes
it.
to your point, Director Sander, of we have to get the
People
good data
don't know.
before we go educate.
Yeah.
Yeah, good one. Okay, all right, so maybe just to lead you to what an implementation plan could look like for the next 5 years for the long-range plan, right? So we've just talked about the policies and actions that was in your attachment B, summarize the prior slide. That, we're gonna be doing a lot of engagement over the next few months. Policies and actions will be out for public comment, so we're gonna receive a lot of feedback on those. I've mentioned this, it won't be in the draft released early June or this week at committees, but coming soon, we're writing up every single city and county, and what your staff has told us are 2 or 3 things that they would love help with that overlap with the regional blueprint priorities, right? And guess what? Every jurisdiction is different. And I think it's a great testament to how you sort of, and Director Baines, I remember When we had coffee 2 years ago, you said, how does Sutter County show up in the plan? Well, Sutter County, among other things, shows up by having a page for Sutter County, right? And talking about your priorities, as it does Rancho and Auburn and every jurisdiction. So that, I think, is going to be really fruitful and rich. We mentioned the monitoring report, right? We can actually break down some of these indicators by 5-year increments about what, if we're going to try to achieve this by 2050, across all kinds of metrics, what would it look like in the next 5 years? And then finally, a grant strategy, which again, I think we're already working on with our regional transportation prioritization process. So those could be, right, the elements of an implementation plan that we're going to have a work plan that sort of guides sort of internal OWP, all kinds of overall work program. But if there's any kind of external, perhaps these might be some of the elements in that sort of external to both obviously have you understand where we're heading as an agency, but also to have your colleagues on your boards and councils, right? Your staff, the stakeholders, et cetera. So make sense?
So can I just add, so the more localized, nuanced piece that you just referenced, that's not going to be available to the final version in November, not for the committee support.
I think it'll come out actually over the summer.
Okay.
So things are trailing a little bit. We have somebody who's a really good writer who's helping us. We have to get the required pieces out now for a 60-day comment period, EIR. So it's just lagging that because we want to just make sure they read well, but it will come out before the end of the plan.
And I really do appreciate that because I think it's important. I mean, we're constantly working collectively as a region, but having that ability to highlight, because there are similarities, but there are also differences. So I really do appreciate that. Not just so I know what I know what my jurisdiction is, but not just the fact getting our issues out, but then better understanding my colleagues as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's great.
Yeah, great. All right, and then we'll just wrap up with, again, my leadership goals here, which we've included here, and I've included here in part, again, to remind you that that's going to kick off next month, but also to pull this back, right, into what we've just walked through for the work plan, right? So effectively engaging the board in the work so that you all understand our work and can guide it and also educate your colleagues to deepen those relationships with partners and community-based organizations. So we have meaningful relationships with we will not implement this plan by ourselves, right? We can't. And then you can see the rest here. So those have been my goals the last few years. You can either give me any comments now or talk to me offline or expect to see them in the packet when it comes out next month. And that wraps that up. I really appreciate all your questions and your engagement in this. It's great to see.
All right. Well, does anyone want to make any comments on that, or would you prefer just to kind of think about that and then? Seeing none, we'll just know that we'll be thinking about that. All right.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. We do have a member of the public with their hand raised. Would you like to take public comment? at this time?
Absolutely. I'd like to take public comment. We did earlier, but we'll reopen public
Okay.
comment.
And are you keeping that to 3 minutes?
Yes,
Chair?
3 minutes yes. Thank you for the reminder.
Okay. Roland, your hand is raised in the Strategic Planning Committee meeting. We're ready for your public comment now. At a maximum of 3 minutes.
It's not going to take 3 minutes. Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity, and I apologize for not being quick enough earlier. From my point of view, a lot of the information that was presented today is very valuable, and I am looking at the transcript, but unfortunately, I'm unable to save the transcript. And I'm wondering, moving forward, if it would be possible to enable the transcript button at the bottom of the transcript so that I can save it. And the alternative, could someone possibly forward me a copy of the transcript at the conclusion of the meeting? Thank you.
I think you're referring to the presentation versus a transcript, correct? But
I'll look into this. I'll follow up with him. He
Thank you
did
so
send me
much.
an email,
Okay.
so I'll take care of that. Thank you.
any further public comment before we move on?
There's no other public comment.
Thank you. All right, other matters before us? It appears there are none. So without objection.
Madam Chair, can I do one quick other matter? Just mention
Absolutely, sorry.
the STIP funding program, and We will be having a lunch on Thursday between the Transportation and Land Use Committee on the STIP program. So it is on the agendas, but any board member is welcome to attend those. That is a natural extension of the Transportation Committee, so public meeting and
Sorry, it'll be about the STIP, but also just the full,
the full funding round.
full funding
The
round.
full funding round, including a federal. There you go.
Okay.
All right.
Seeing no other matters before us, without objection, we will adjourn. Hearing none, that shall be the order. Thank you, everyone.